Following Mania's success, it became clear that Sega was trying to pose Classic Sonic as its own little sub-series, and at first I was all for it. Let the modern games be all risky and experimental, while Classic sticks to the relatively safe, tried and true 2D gameplay. Modern Sonic can have the deeper storylines and more intricate world building, while Classic can keep it simple and to the point. This would help create a very clear distinction between 2D and 3D Sonic, each appealing to very different sides of the fan base. And from a marketing standpoint, that's pretty smart. But recently I've come to realize 2D Sonic really has nothing to gain from adhering to 30-year-old gameplay and storytelling conventions. If it wasn't obvious, Superstars is very much the catalyst for this video. What at first looked like a fresh take on classic Sonic ended up feeling like the new Super Mario Bros. Of the series. It's mechanically sound, it's functional, it's fun, but it's equally as bland and uninventive. This is the 6th classic Sonic game, and there's been little done to effectively build upon what came before. On paper, it adds a lot to the established formula, but not in a way that indicates a deep understanding of classic Sonic gameplay and how to properly refine it. You expect more from a follow-up to Sonic Mania, a game that fully understands classic Sonic down to the bone. The drop dash perfectly demonstrates the team's understanding of this formula, a move so complementary to this type of gameplay that it's since snuck its way into every classic Sonic game. This level of understanding can be felt throughout the entire game in every major design decision. It's enough to keep Mania from feeling stale despite its apparent unoriginality. You don't really get that with Superstars. Generic elemental abilities and poorly implemented multiplayer don't really do it for me. These feel like additions just for addition's sake, rather than something that was thoughtfully implemented into the existing design. It's why a game that's technically less original feels 10 times more innovative. Classic Sonic has a pretty well-established formula that's proven to work really well. It's risky to tamper with it in any significant way, lest you risk ruining the series' appeal. It's definitely safer to include less fundamental changes and mostly stick with what's been proven to work. You're not going to see classic Sonic boosting or doing tricks anytime soon. And while that's not necessarily what I'd want, I do think it's important to keep building on the established gameplay to keep things from getting stale. But to include changes that can fit within the classic Sonic bubble while still feeling like worthwhile additions, you need a team that truly understands the ins and outs of this gameplay. And even then, there's only so much you can do, only so many classic Sonic games you can push out before you kind of have to break out of that box. And that's just not something I see them doing with classic Sonic. I think they really want to uphold those two distinct brands. But when one of those is fundamentally linked to the past, it can be hard to move forward. So for anyone who's tasked with making a classic Sonic game, a strict adherence to this formula is more of a creative limitation than anything else. And I think it's helped contribute to 2D Sonic's overall stagnation. I won't deny that outside its gameplay, there's a unique appeal to classic Sonic that a lot of people gravitate to. There's a charm to these smaller versions of the characters and the voiceless Looney Tunes-esque animations. But I think in trying to mold classic Sonic as the safe alternative to modern Sonic, they've leaned too far into the cutesy side of the character, removing a lot of the edge that set him apart from other platform mascots. The classic Sonic from the 90s and the one we have now give off completely different vibes. The Sonic people think of when they think of a cool classic Sonic doesn't really exist anymore, replaced by a relatively bland, dumbed down alternative, on top of classic already being a more tame version of modern Sonic. And this softening of the main character extends to the rest of the game's presentation. Overall, 2D Sonic is in desperate need of some creativity, innovation, and style, and I think modern Sonic is the answer. Mania is probably my favorite game in the series, and I hold most of the classic games in high regard, but I vastly prefer modern Sonic's world, style, and tone. Classic Sonic beats a level, does a little jump, and wags his finger at the screen. How cute. Modern Sonic clears a level and he starts breakdancing. A classic story has Sonic go to an island to stop Eggman from turning animals into robots. Meanwhile, modern Sonic is out here throwing down with titans and uncovering 50-year-old government conspiracies. Modern Sonic can have dialogue that helps flesh out the characters and the story they're a part of. Classic Sonic can't even talk. I could go on. The point is, I've always gravitated more towards modern Sonic. Nothing about Mania being a classic game particularly elevates it for me, besides the fact that its gameplay is synonymous with that series. The Advance and Rush series, while nowhere near as good as Mania, show that this gameplay can translate pretty seamlessly into a modern game, which begs the question, why not do that? What better way to inject some life into 2D Sonic than to embrace some of modern's unique charm, while expanding on the momentum-based gameplay that makes the classic so beloved? I think it's the perfect time for another modern 2D Sonic game. First of all, a modern 2D game can get away with axing the one-button gameplay. The classic games are defined by that one-button gameplay philosophy. You jump, spin dash, use elemental shields, and each character's special ability all with one button. This has changed to include a separate button for transformations, and Superstars edged a little closer with the power-ups taking a whole other button on the controller. Oh my gosh. It's clear they're a little scared to deviate too much from that original philosophy. Again, it's a tried and true classic Sonic staple that's risky to mess with, but a modern 2D game wouldn't have that problem. problem. You could build whole 2D movesets with these characters in a way that classic Sonic couldn't really do. You could put a stomp on circle, boost on R2, bring back the trick system with the left analog stick. I imagine a character like Knuckles could drill through walls to reach hidden areas. You could have his glide carry momentum and let him dash up walls like he could in Advance 3. You could expand on Amy's advanced gameplay and let her bounce herself off enemies like they're springs. Then you could bring in a ranking system that rewards players for making the most of each character's moveset. None of what I just described would fly in a classic game. Knuckles still can't glide or climb faster than 2 yards an hour, and Tails can't even break out of flight without touching the ground first. If they aren't willing to change stuff like that, there's no chance they're willing to switch things up this drastically. At least, not for classic Sonic. A modern game can afford to implement new and interesting things without causing problems. Case in point, Advance and Rush. I'm really just scratching the surface of what they could do by leveraging this newfound creative freedom. With modern Sonic, there are endless ways to expand on this series' 2D gameplay. There's also the fact that there's a lot more you can do with a modern Sonic story. Whatever little story the classic games have is held back by the lack of modern presentation. That doesn't necessarily mean it's worse, but there's objectively less you can do with no dialogue and minimal cutscene animation. You couldn't really have voice acting or complex cutscenes on the Genesis, but this persists 30 years later because these limitations have become tradition. Then you consider that classic Sonic, as the name suggests, is a younger version of Sonic, meaning every game has to take place before his modern redesign and adventure, which means you can't pull from the last 25 years of Sonic history. You can't have characters like Shadow, Blaze, Silver, Sage, or anyone from IDW because Sonic hasn't met them yet. These are beloved characters that fans are dying to see more of. It cuts off the majority of Sonic's extended cast, and with it, years of interesting world building elements. You can't have Gun, you can't have references to the Ark, the entire lore behind Chaos and the Ancients, you can't have the Soul Dimension, Chao, Wisps, Coco. They cut themselves off from so much of what makes Sonic's world interesting, and this hurts the storytelling potential. This also limits the potential for playable characters. Sure, Classic could always create new ones or bring in some obscure characters, but Sonic's modern cast is already in desperate need of fleshing out. We are just now getting to a point where main cast members like Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Shadow can be more than just background characters. When you consider that characters like Blaze, Silver, or the Chaotix pretty much haven't been playable since their debut games, and thus haven't really mattered since then, you can see why I'd want to explore some of the cast we already have instead of constantly bringing in new characters or digging up some old one nobody cares about. I promise you, nobody trying to play as Bean the Dynamite before we get another chance to play as Blaze. Even if you don't think Sonic stories really matter, tell me which of these story pitches sounds like it opened the door to more interesting level themes and design gimmicks. Another by the numbers classic Sonic game where Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles go to some island to stop Eggman from turning animals into robots, or one where Sonic, Silver, and Cream go to the Soul Dimension to help Blaze take her kingdom back from a group of usurpers. A spiritual successor to the Rush games with the style turned up to 11 and the funky EDM the series is known for. You could use this as a chance to explore these fan favorite characters, explain how Silver travels to and from the future, how Blaze warps across dimensions. Let us see more of these two's dynamic. Show us more of the Soul Dimension and Blaze's place in it. How dope would it be to explore a level taking place in and around her palace? Do you see what I mean? Modern 2D games could help flesh out the series in a way a dozen Superstar sequels couldn't dream of. You could argue classic Sonic could do something new and interesting that helps a future entry stand out, and that's true. I don't think Superstars is the best metric for classic Sonic's potential, but I think those classic Sonic staples hold it back from ever being as interesting as a modern 2D game could be. And I don't see the point in limiting a game's potential to reinforce a largely pointless brand distinction. I respect and appreciate a lot of what makes classic Sonic. The one-button gameplay has led to a lot of intuitive design decisions. The lack of dialogue can lead to some great environmental storytelling, and at its best, classic Sonic can be cool and stylish in his own right. But none of that compares to the potential I see in expanding upon momentum-based gameplay while taking advantage of modern Sonic's appeal. If they came out a couple years from now with a Superstar sequel in the same style, would y'all really be interested? Would that excite you knowing what could have been? And I'm gonna leave it at that. Before y'all head out, let me know what you think is the best direction for 2D Sonic. Should they keep going with the classic stuff and see what else they can do with it? Or should they fully embrace modern Sonic going forward? But yeah, that's all for now. See ya.